there is something to be said, and when we're talking about quality, that we've had an individual personally check through something and make sure that it's correct. So I don't know. I think that there should be some record of whose hands have been on that tray. And we have a lot of capability to do that now with tracking systems. And I'm sure that's where we're going to go with the data piece of this conversation.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
Join us for this episode of Beyond Clean is Bobby Parker, the Vice President here at Beyond Clean. You've probably seen him around in various podcasts. You may have seen him hosting some events. You may have seen him at some live events doing some fantastic educating. But we got him in the interview studio today talking about the topic of proactive quality assurance and all the data that's involved in that. If this is a new concept for you, stay tuned because we're going to go in depth for what is this proactive part of quality assurance, what kind of gaps are out there in terms of how we report our errors, and how do we hardwire this into a department that then has more data to educate itself, to leverage, to improve their customer satisfaction in the operating room. We're going to be talking about all that today with Bobby. So hang around and we'll be right back.
I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Join us on this episode of the Beyond Clean podcast. We've got Bobby Parker in studio with us today. So if you've been listening to this season, you've heard Bobby is one of the co-hosts on some of these episodes, but I got him on the other side of the mic for this episode talking about proactive quality assurance, error rates in sterile processing, and all the data that's surrounding that, including some of the gaps and misconceptions. So we're going to be grilling Bobby today, and you can join me for that grill fest right now. Bobby, thank you so much for accepting my invite to come on the show today.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. This is a topic that I feel like we get wrong a lot in the industry, and I got wrong a lot in my own management of sterile processing departments. And so looking to right some wrongs today and maybe spread some knowledge. So
that's awesome. Well, in the beginning here, I'm going to dedicate this interview to Shirley Rocky, who is very near and dear to both of our hearts, but she was our quality assurance specialist and technician for many years in our early years of sterile processing for Bobby and I both at two different hospitals. So, Shirley was all about the QA, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today and what we learned through the process and the data, we got to see Shirley in that role as that assurance technician really bring these things to light. So Shirley, if you're listening, or if you know Shirley, please reach out and let her know that she got a shout out on this show. Okay. Proactive quality assurance. Let's start there, define the terms like we do all the time here. What does that mean and what does it not mean, or what's it trying to get at?
I would say that the typical response to quality defects in sterile processing departments is reactive in nature. So let me paint a quick picture for you. Technician John reprocesses a tray, does so incorrectly. Maybe it's missing an item. The OR receives that tray. They find it. They then report that defect back to sterile processing. Sterile processing records that dot as a significant data point in the quality documentation if they're forward thinking enough to be tracking that. John is then retrained on that tray, and then our duty for quality assurance is over. We had a defect. We reactively respond to that. We do the retraining and move on with life. That's the reactive model to quality assurance. And what we're talking about is trying to push that into the realm of proactive. And so, similar situation, John processes a tray incorrectly, but you have, through random sampling, proactively grabbed John's tray prior to it making to the OR. You catch and fix John's mistake. And then when the OR receives their product, it's a quality product that doesn't have an error in it. And you are continuing to monitor internally these trends, and you develop some quality-centered department training that spreads to everyone and not just John in particular, so that you're elevating your skill set. And so the question is, are we going to only respond to the mistakes that the OR tells us, or are we going to try to push that into the realm of the proactive? And that's what I want to talk about today.
Yeah, this is a really big topic and really systemic, right? So everybody has a quality program. It's either good or bad. It's either complex or simple, but you got some kind of quality program because you got customers on the other end of your instruments that they've got certain expectations regarding the trays. And some of those expectations are higher. Some of them are lower. Sometimes it has to do with the particular nurse or the surgical tech that encounters your tray. They don't all have the same standard. So maybe let's start there, Bobby, talking about some of the gaps or inconsistencies around this reactive model that's very, very common in the space still today. Probably a lot of folks listening, that's your model. And if you don't hear anything from the OR, you're assuming, hey, we're good. Things are going well. I'm not getting any complaints, no phone calls, no emails, no photos. Everything's good. That's your measurement of quality. But back to what I was saying earlier, that's kind of dependent on the individual on an oftentimes very manual process. So in your experience or your opinion, Bobby, why is that not a good and scalable process?
Well, the old adage is in manufacturing that your customer defines your quality. And I generally agree with that sentiment, although it does give me a little bit of an axe to grind, because to your point, depending on how sensitive the conscience is of that scrub tech or OR nurse, there may be a very wide range of acceptable quality to the OR. And so in addition to defining what our trays need to look like based on what's acceptable to our OR, we also have to measure our processes and our products under the umbrella of what is best practice according to guidelines out there. So what I see most often is that the Sterile Processing's opinion of what's required in their trays is a lot more strict, a lot more specific than what the OR looks at maybe when they open the tray. They're just looking for, are the indicators in there? Are the instruments free of bioburden and debris? If there's some flakes or specks on the bottom of the tray, maybe those are kind of overlooked and just moving on with life. But I'd say one of the biggest challenges with the reactive model is you're not going to get consistent, reliable feedback on what your trays actually looked like and the condition of them, to the point that you already made. And that's probably the biggest one, is it makes the assumption that we only have an issue whenever it gets reported to us by the OR. And so many mistakes go unseen, either because they went through that OR technician who has a more relaxed perspective of what's required from the tray, or maybe they're just so busy that they don't ever get that feedback back to the sterile processing department. Or you may have a problem that everybody knows is an issue, but it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And it only gets reported once the big Sentinel event happens, when it caused a real big problem. And then you find out about it. And what's the feedback that you always get when that happens? Well, it's like this every time we get the tray. This has been going on for months, but Sterile Processing, well, guys, this is the first time I've ever heard about it. That is the problem with the reactive model. There are a handful of others that tend to happen. So quality assurance, it ends up kind of being a badge of honor or pride or shame that technicians end up wearing for one another. And so you get a very strong or very weak perception of tech's skills, and that's based on perception and not data. And so if it just so happens that Betty's trays are the ones that always seem to come back from the OR, then she's going to be painted in a very negative light. But other technicians who are just perhaps getting lucky, maybe thinking that they're doing better than they are when they're putting out poor quality. And I would say lastly, the quality assurance in general is just not done with a larger vision for how do we improve as a department together. We're just stuck always reacting to what the most recent problem or most recent pet peeve of the OR is, but we're not trying to get anywhere or improve anything in particular, just responding, coaching that one employee and moving on. So yeah, a lot of holes that we can talk about in the reactive model of quality assurance, the biggest of which being you just don't know until somebody gets mad enough to tell you about it.
Well, and even there's an implication, I don't know what a good phrase for this would be, but if they've seen the same problem long enough, it's kind of like an error fatigue, maybe. And they just get used to it, and that's the status quo. As we know, hey, these needle holders, half the time, they actually don't ratchet and they don't lock, but that's just like all of our needle holders are like that. So we're not going to report those errors anymore. So, to your point, it's not the error is not there. It's just that something has happened culturally or process-wise in the OR that information is not getting back to you. And then another thing, this is kind of a flip side to one of the things that you mentioned is you could get a coordinator or you could get a particular surgical tech who is very picky. They're not relaxed. And you start getting all these reports from maybe your orthopedic or like your cardiovascular service line. And you're like, well, what's going on with these cardiac trays? Like, we just cannot get it right. And the question is it because there's a different process for those trays and they actually do have a higher error rate than all your other trays? Or is it tied to an individual in the OR who is going either above and beyond everyone else's reportings, or maybe they're the only ones reporting? Who knows? But it's really highlighting those gaps and inconsistencies that you've been referring to.
Yeah, it reminds me of a study. I can't even remember what city it was from. It was a high crime area. It may have been. Yeah, I don't want to guess because I can't remember the study. But what was interesting about it is you saw a really high spike in crime activity in the city, and what had happened was that they had hired a lot more enforcement. And so what was expected was a decrease in it, and they saw a significant increase. But what the cause of that was is just we're catching them more. The enforcement has increased. It's always been there. It's just now we're actually catching it. And so that kind of bias towards, our ortho trays must be in really bad shape because that's what's getting reporting. That might not be the case. We might just have higher enforcement in that particular area.
So let me ask you kind of a random question here, but it ties in to that reference that you made about the reactive of, okay, we got a report. It's Susie's tray. So we're going to go back and we're going to re-educate. We're going to coach Susie about whatever the issue was. What's your thoughts on the good, the bad, the ugly about putting our names on our trays so that the OR knows that it was Susie's tray and not just a tray from the department?
Yeah, there's certainly bad and ugly to that. I'm sure you've seen this as well when you've got a struggling employee that has had some quality issues, and more astute of our OR representatives learn to recognize and fear that name and not want to use trays with that name on it. But you have to have some kind of identifier of who put that tray together. That's part of best practice. And so I'm a fan of having it on there and just holding our technicians accountable to the quality for their trays. I know there's a lot of sensitivity about even talking about mistakes that have happened and who was the person who assembled that tray and put it forward. I think the healthiest sterile processing department is the one who can move past some of that fear, shame, and secrecy around those and really own the mistakes that are tied to a particular name. So something that we did whenever we had significant mistakes going on in the department is we would ask that person after we've gone through the process review and try to figure out what the root cause of the issue was, we would ask that person to go and train the rest of the team on that particular tray and tell them what to watch out for related to that mistake they made. That didn't always go over so well. I had one employee literally call out sick because they were so sick to their stomach about giving a staff meeting and talking to the team about how to do a tray. It's like, okay, I will give your in-service for you. You don't have to come in and do it. But gosh, I think the more that we can get people looking at processes as being the source of our errors and getting people invested in how do I make certain that my teammates never make this mistake again, the healthier we're going to be, rather than pinning that quality on who's the best technician and they must be a terrible one because they make a lot of mistakes. And so we just have to hide everybody's names in secrecy. So, yeah.
This would be an interesting discussion just broadly, and I want to kind of keep us focused on the data point here, but the cultural implications and the assumption that sterile processing is at the same time a team effort, but then also an individual effort, right? Like you put your name on something, a lot of folks, they take that extremely seriously to the point that if they're done with the tray, they've assembled it. But, maybe they just got, 10 trays assembled, but they need to be containerized or they need to be wrapped. You had better not, if that's not the tray that you assembled, you had better not touch that tray and try to help out by containerizing it or by wrapping it, because it's not your name going on that tray in these technicians' perspectives. But like something about the team dynamic and the process dynamic really does not jive with that concept. If we are a team, if we trust the process, shouldn't we trust our peers and our coworkers to containerize or to wrap our trays, Bob?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think back to like manufacturing and the people in the quality department who do the final trays, or even in a hotel room, your room professionally cleaned for you by John. There is something to be said, and when we're talking about quality, that we've had an individual personally check through something and make sure that it's correct. So I don't know. I think that there should be some record of whose hands have been on that tray. And we have a lot of capability to do that now with tracking systems. And I'm sure that's where we're going to go with the data piece of this conversation. But even if you don't, if you've got other people wrapping the trays or doing that final quality check, I've always been a proponent of having a second set of initials on that tray, of just so that you can have some way of demonstrating that it wasn't only that person's hands on it. But from the OR's perspective, yes, I think they should have been given enough confidence in the overall performance of the sterile processing department to be able to see every one of those trays as just a tray that came from sterile processing, and not this one's better because it's John's and not Susie's tray.
We've been throwing a lot of rocks at the reactive process and, highlighting all the gaps. But let's talk about this proactive quality assurance idea that you threw out, kind of defined at the beginning. What does this look like practically? Maybe just an average day in the department. You got trays coming out of decon. You got trays being assembled. Where does this proactive check actually happen? Who's doing it, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, there's a lot of different models. And I want to say, I don't think there are any sterile processing departments out there who are not doing proactive quality assurance because they think it's a bad idea in principle. We would all agree that more quality checks, probably a good thing. The problem is that they take time. And there aren't any sterile processing departments out there that just have way too much time on their hands. The question is just, how much are we going to prioritize it? What's going to give? And I think there is some that's worth giving in order to have at least some level of statistically significant quality assurance. And so the person who's going to be doing that quality assurance check, whether that's done on a tray that was sterile on the shelf, ready to go, or one that's being looked over after assembly before it gets into the sterilizer, typically that's going to be done by somebody who has some degree of leadership responsibility. So maybe if you have shift supervisors, they share that load and they each do, throughout the course of their full shift, they each do 1 or 2 trays that they grab. And then across the week, maybe you're going to have 30 or 40 trays that you've checked before sterilization or before they got to the OR that are truly random sample and hopefully statistically significant number. And As you do that, what I suspect that you will find as we're kind of diving into this quality piece is that the percent of the number of trays that meet your standards of what's acceptable for your OR based on those 30 or 40 that you get through in a week is not going to match the quality percent that you're reporting to your quality and risk management and infection prevention teams, which is usually calculated in a really different manner.
And one of the reasons I'm assuming is that this quality assurance specialist or those shift leaders that you mentioned, they've got eagle eyes, right? They're the kinds of technicians and leaders that if there's something wrong, they don't have the patient on the table. They're not thinking about the doctor procedure or anything. All they got is all these instruments in this tray, and they got that whole checklist of everything that should be checked through the instruments, through the tray, through the lineup, through the indicators, like you name it. They've got this checklist in front of it, and now they've got this tray that they're able to go through in a very controlled manner and say, they meet this standard, this standard, this standard, this standard. Most of the time, they're QAing trays by technicians that have less experience, less training, less exposure. So it really is that highest level of review that's possible from shift to shift and from tray to tray.
That's right. And so in the reactive model, not only do you not get back very much feedback, but you weigh that little bit of feedback that you get back against every tray that we've put through the department or through the sterilizer. And so what you end up is using this very small bit of feedback as your numerator for your percentage, but your denominator is everything that we've scanned. And so you inevitably end up, even for a department that has pretty poor quality in general, with a quality percentage of 99.7% quality trays. But when you get down into the specifics of, okay, what does sterile processing actually want and require from our trays, and have someone trained in that, like a QA tech, to go through your trays and pick out all of those defects, you might find a very different quality percent, because this is random sampling. This should be representative of our entire inventory. And you might find of those 30, 40 trays that's only 70% of them met your standards. And so what I'm arguing for, and what I think departments ought to be doing, is having a statistically significant number of trays be checked by a sterile processing trained person who knows what quality standards we want from our trays, and use the percentage of the number of trays that they looked at to be the true gauge of what their department's quality is. Maybe that should be getting reported to our OR, to our quality and risk team, to our infection prevention team, of how successfully we're doing in our training and moving the quality in sterile processing, and not just those ultra rare, like significant bioburden events that happened in the OR as being our only indication of what sterile processing qualities looks like.
So let's talk about what's being QA'd and that stage of which it's being checked. You kind of reference, hey, you could pull these things off sterile in storage. They've already gone through the whole process. You could potentially, as soon as the technician gets done assembling them prior to packaging, you could then do a QA check there. Is there any other stage in the process that would align with this kind of proactive model and approach?
I think so. And this gets into the data a little bit. So we talked about having a QA tech or a supervisor checking trays that are in sterile storage, or maybe right before they go into the sterilizer. In reality, in sterile processing, you're doing a quality assurance check on every tray. That's what prep and pack and assembly is, right? And so when we encounter something that's dirty, what we ask our technicians to do is to send, hopefully, that whole tray back to decontam, disinfect their workstation, and keep moving on as they pass that feedback back into decontamination. We've just done some quality assurance that was proactive. We did not let the OR tell us about that dirty instrument that came through. And what I wish more departments would put the effort into doing is capturing that QA moment of the data of which instruments are we sending back to decontam all the time, at what frequency, and seeing that as a key performance indicator of our department. Because if we just count on our assembly technicians, who are human and bound to make mistakes, to catch every issue that comes through the washers, some of it is going to end up in the OR. So rather than just seeing that OR reported problem as an issue in prep and pack and keep training, check harder, you didn't look at this, maybe we should be taking those prep and pack items sent back to decontam as our KPI and trying to reduce that number. Let's figure out how can we make changes that's going to reduce the number of dirty trays that we have sent back to decontam. That's one that I think would probably be best done with tracking systems help. It could be done manually, although it would take some time, but that's not done very often across the industry, at least is what I've seen.
So, Bobby, let's take this data then that's being gathered under this proactive model and do two things. I'm going to ask you first about the implications that this has for the sterile processing team itself. So, like, what are you going to do with all this data you've been gathering and checking besides just talking to the individual? And then my next question after that is, what are we going to do with this data in regards to the operating room customer or maybe the C-suite? Like, how can we leverage that? So let's start first. You're getting all this. How do you use this to educate or to change the practice of your team?
Well, that could have been a whole a whole interview. So I guess I first want to answer the question that first comes to people's minds, and that has to do with how do we respond to errors and in terms of it being punitive or coaching. And certainly every department's going to have a different culture around that. But regardless of whatever line you have to take because of either your union environment or your management style about how you're going to respond to departments, it is valuable information to have in terms of individual technician performance. What the individual's quality rate was is a powerful number to have with you as you're going over annual reviews, as you're going over just employee one-on-one check-ins, as one of the many indicators of how successful they are as an employee. So it is significant information to have at an individual level, but as a team level, gathering that data and having it put out there to the team is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of how well your team is going to be improving the quality, because what doesn't get measured doesn't get improved, and people don't get excited about something that they don't know is going on. Having a number to be publishing to your team, talking about it in shift huddles is already just a cultural impetus that's going to get people excited about improving the quality, because they know that they're awesome. They're proud of the work that they do, but they want to see that on paper and want to have something to work towards and be able to celebrate together. And so if you're just gathering the quality data, talking with the one technician that was responsible for it and not doing anything else with it, you're really selling yourself short on some significant quality and cultural impacts.
And you're missing out on that opportunity to keep the errors in-house and like the blowback in-house, right? Because if these things are being caught again before they're making it to the operating room, before they're making it to the patient, there's still errors, there's still problems, the breakdowns in the process, but a lot less visibility to your customers and a lot less implications on, case delays or potential exposures, et cetera. So it's a controllable environment that's more, hey, we're working together to improve ourselves and our team, less kind of on the public stage out there of these are where they're challenged or where they're struggling down at SPD. So I think that's an important takeaway. So let's flip that though, because the other part of that question is, well, yeah, but what do you do with all this proactive data in terms of the operating room customer? What should they know? What should you make them aware of that's going on in the process? How can you leverage this to improve customer service, to improve quality outcomes, et cetera?
Well, I get that that's culturally sensitive, right? Because you don't necessarily want to air your dirty laundry in front of your customers. I mean, we don't get a report from our car manufacturers of issues that they found inside the manufacturing plant and that they fixed before the car got released from the lot. So I get it. At the same time, it is frustrating, I'm sure, for our customers to be getting that 99.7% correct report coming from Sterile Processing. But what they're experiencing on a daily basis is 30% of their trays having some kind of defect, but they're just not all big enough deals to go through the trouble of reporting it again and nothing being done about it, or at least so they think. And so if you want to take a big step forward culturally with your OR and in inviting them into that collaborative teamwork around point of use cleaning, that collaborative teamwork around improving quality and improving the number of things that actually get reported to Sterile Processing, I think being forward thinking and with an open hand presenting that quality data of here's how bad we really think it is in terms of our defects, and here's what we're doing about it, I think can do a lot in terms of building that collaborative trust between the two departments and over time, as you're tracking that and sharing that data, you now have another department that can celebrate with you as it improves and be able to brag on your team in front of the OR about how awesome they really are, that you know that they're awesome, but you want to show your customers that they are awesome. And so I think that's really important. A couple of ways that I've seen that done, and we've talked about this a couple of times, and I know that there's a couple of articles on Beyond Clean as well about this, is putting together a really good monthly sterile processing newsletter where you talk about the new initiatives that are going on, celebrating the people in the department, the new certifications in the process or in the department, new processes and quality inspection equipment that you have in the department. But in addition to that, that's a really great spot to put kind of that month's numbers of number of trays that were processed, types of, or number of internal quality audits that were done, internal quality percentage that was measured, and then any of those kind of reported defects, and trending that and celebrating wins. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah, that idea of leveraging the data, even if it's bad, I think that's a concept that we should really think more about in sterile processing. And I understand because, like you said, like it's never comfortable to say this is how bad we're doing at our jobs. Like no one really wants to advertise that. But you don't get C-level support. You don't get customer support. You don't get any support if you act like everything's better than it is because people think it's good. And then the only time it surfaces that it's not good, that the process is broken, is when you get a big Joint Commission citation or when you get one of those Sentinel events that you mentioned. It's much better to be transparent to your point about this is where we are, not to stay here, not because we're happy here, to say, and together, everyone in this whole process is going to work together to report what we're doing to improve the process. We're going to measure that report, and we're going to show that we are actually getting to that level of quality that our patients deserve. So great takeaway, great conversation here, Bobby. As always, we scratch the surface on these issues. We don't get to everything that could be said or should be said about a topic like proactive quality assurance. So if folks got questions, I know you referenced some of the articles that are already on Beyond Clean, but how should folks get a hold of you if they've got specifics on, hey, how do I do this? You convinced me that I need to do it, that we should do it, but I still have some other questions on how to get started. How can folks get in contact with you for that?
Yep. The easiest way is just to find me on LinkedIn. You're also welcome to send me an email at bobby@beyondclean.net. And I would say as you're getting started in this journey and figuring out whatever process you're going to use for doing those quality audits, I would also look, and we didn't talk about this much, Hank, but this is significant for the statistics and data piece of this. I would also look at what does that process look like for your OR being able to report quality events back to you? Because if it's a convoluted process that involves a lot of people's times, it's not going to be done. Like make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do for your OR. So whether that's getting a tracking system in your OR where they're scanning trays to patients and they can just instantly be able to report a quality event right there during the case at the computer, or have a designated person who is going to bellhop service come and get that tray from them where they just have to pick up a phone and ask them to come do it. Make sure that that process is really smooth so that you can get that feedback flowing and that you can get that conversation started. It's a great place to get going.
All right. Well, that's probably going to be another video or blog article to talk about that piece of the puzzle because you're right. That's massive. And I hate to leave a little cliffhanger there, but you're going to have to stay tuned for more information about that. All right. Well, thank you, Bobby, again for coming on the show today.
Absolutely.
That was Bobby Parker, Vice President at Beyond Clean, talking about a topic that we have touched on occasionally through the various seasons here at Beyond Clean, proactive quality assurance. But it's a very, very important topic. Hopefully we convinced you of some of that in today's interview. And the tie-in with the data piece, we all want our data to look good. That's just natural, and we want to be there. But the only way that we can get there in reality to see that customer experience actually understand and value the quality journey that we've been on as a department, I think, and it seems like Bobby agrees, is that you need to gather more data points that's actually tangible to what's going on in the process. And the best way to do that is through these proactive quality checks. Because in the sterile processing department, in the workflow when these QA checks are happening. There's no patient on the table. There's no doctor saying, hurry up, let's get this thing going. The only goal in the moment for those proactive checks is to make sure that these trays meet the highest level of quality that we can release from sterile processing. And then you have the data to educate internally for the process, and then also to leverage with your customers in the OR to improve everything ultimately for the patient outcome. So a lot of great topics and themes that came up in today's show. So like Bobby said, if you want to reach out for any other questions or maybe just a brainstorm around this, you can track him down on LinkedIn or email him at bobby@beyondclean.net. But that's going to do it for this week's show. If you've not already subscribed to the Beyond Clean podcast on iTunes, Apple, Google, Spotify, all those fun things, make sure to track us down on your podcast channel of your choice, or you can download us on the Beyond Clean mobile app on Android and Apple. And make sure to send us your ideas for future guests and topics on the show. You can email us at info@beyondclean.net. But we appreciate your time today. And as we love to say here at Beyond Clean, we want to encourage you to keep fighting dirty.